traps. How do you grow traps? Right? Mm-hmm. You have the handful of people who just tell you have to do shrugs.
Right.
And then you have the other half of the people who say, nah, you don't need to do traps. Just do deadlifts and rows and Romanian deadlifts and your traps are going to grow. Right. So I wanted to discuss trap training. How do you get those mountains up top? And I think that, of course, the answer is always in the middle, right? That's always the typical answer. But it's the same thing when people talk about, you don't need to train arms if you're doing pull-ups.
Exactly what I was going to say.
And I hate that. Yeah. And it's the same thing for traps. The poor traps get the same treatment when it comes to that. So, and I've done it before. I'm so guilty of it. When I was competitive powerlifting, I'm like, I don't need to do shrugs. I'm doing a lot of deadlifts. There's no reason to do it. And to some extent, that is true because you don't want to like waste energy doing certain things. But at the same time, if I got my traps a little stronger, would my deadlift have improved?
Right.
Maybe.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think, the first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned that is that they would make the same argument for years that if you do pull-ups, if you do rows, if you do presses, you don't need to train arms. And I think that myth has been around long enough where people are starting to see it, and even the people that promoted that are starting to say now, you know what, I probably should have extra arm work, direct arm work in my training.
Yeah, they do. That's so true.
Traps is another one of those things that you can make that argument, like you said, where if you're doing heavy deadlifting, I mean, listen, like you take a 600, 700, 800 pound deadlifter, specifically training for powerlifting, most of them do have massive traps, right? But could their traps improve, and who knows if they're doing shrugs or not? Could their traps improve from doing extra shrug work? I think so, and I think not only will that build more muscle to the traps that will help their deadlift, like you mentioned, I think it'll make you more well-rounded with your lifting in general. But, the traps are going to respond to a lot of different things. If you're very strong on the big compound movements, you're probably going to have at least decent traps. But like anything else, if genetically they're a weak point for you, you can't rely on just other exercises to get them done. You're going to need some direct work to them. Any body part that you're trying to build up, as a trainer, if somebody comes to you and they say, listen, my main goal is this one body part, and let's say it's traps, are you not going to have them do shrugs? Are you going to say, okay, listen, we're just going to deadlift, we're just going to overhead press? Deadlift and overhead press are definitely going to be part of that program, but if their main goal is to bring up that muscle group, of course we're going to train it directly.
Yeah, and most people forget actually. So when I say, I should have actually talked about this in the beginning, but when I say traps, what's the first thing that comes to mind? This, right? Mm-hmm. But you guys remember, the traps look like a kite. They come down muscle, and then they come in. Right. So you have different portions of the traps. You have the upper traps, you have the middle traps, and you have the lower traps. And most people, when I say traps, they just think about here. Yeah. And that's totally not the case at all.
Big muscle,
yeah, they are a very, very big muscle of the back, and they're used for a lot of different things. So for me, I superset a lot of my regular trap work with a lot of that middle and lower trap work, because for me, those areas they're not weak, but development-wise, they don't pop the way I want them to pop. So I have to really work on those areas to get them to kind of pop out and have like that density in that middle back. It's just kind of one of the things for me. My middle back has always been like, not like my middle traps and lower traps have not been like popping enough. So that's one of the things that I've been working on. So for me, I just superset my regular trap work with that. And again, it boils down to the same thing that I said about like biceps. You have to find the exercises that work the best for you.
Right.
I trained with a bodybuilder once. He swore up and down that he got the best feeling in his traps and the best development out of them when he did light dumbbell shrugs. Mm-hmm. That did zero for me, never worked. Right. When I do a barbell shrug, it's like, I don't really feel it that much. What I've been doing lately is I've just been like, and I'm sure you've heard this expression before where they kind of say like, follow the fibers.
Right.
Have you ever heard that expression before?
Yeah.
So I've been doing, I take the cable and I literally do a shrug following that motion. So it's almost like a trap bar shrug, except the trap bar shrug I don't feel the same way because the cable's like constant tension.
Yeah.
But I did it the other day, and my traps were so pumped, and I haven't felt like that feeling in such a long time. When I do barbell shrugs, I don't get anything out of it.
I don't either, and it's funny because I've always genetically I think had at least decent traps. They were never something that I struggled with to develop like some of the other body parts, but I did have to find the exercises that I connected with because in the beginning, barbell shrugs are kind of like the staple exercise for traps. And, when we first started training, we would see like Ronnie Coleman doing those crazy shrugs with all those plates on the bar, doing behind the back, all this stuff. And a lot of the bodybuilders, that was like their one exercise. And you'd get guys in the gym that might be 180, 190, maybe even 200 pounds, and they're shrugging like 5, 6 plates. So in your head, especially when you first start training, you think, okay, the best way to build big traps, you got to load up that barbell. And
I think I messed up my neck doing that when I was
younger. I'm
younger.
sure you did. And, that's something at the heaviest, I think I only went up to like a 4-plate barbell shrug, which is still, it's not light.
It's not even a shrug at that point.
I didn't even get anything out of it,
No.
And it wasn't until I abandoned that approach completely and I said, I don't feel this exercise. Now, like you said, you're using a cable. I do some technique adjustments. I actually do use cable shrugs in my training too as well. I use even a straight bar or a cambered bar when I do them, which I like as well. But I also could do a very similar technique with the dumbbells. And we're talking about like, on a cable, I'll use like maybe 200 pounds max, with 2 arms, and compare that to a 405 dumbbell, a barbell shrug. I'm getting way more out of the cable. And I'm not saying that you need to do a cable shrug or you need to do a dumbbell shrug, but if you're not feeling that muscle group and that exercise, loading on more weight is not going to get you better results.
Yeah, like for me, it's the same thing. Like I feel, so when I do dumbbell shrugs, like that angle, I feel it, but it's just like not enough as much as when I feel it with the cable. So I'm better off putting more emphasis on the cable for me because I'm getting more out of that. Like I feel more development with that. I get pumped easier. So it's like, okay, I'm just gonna kind of stick with this. And again, if you want to talk anatomy, I'm following the fibers when I'm doing that. When you have a dumbbell shrug or dumbbell, you're in line. It's not really following that fiber directly. But like I said, when I use a barbell, the weight has to be a little bit heavier, and it's just like I'm not getting that same contraction as when I'm using the cable.
I agree. 100%.
But again, guys, if you think that you're just going to do RDLs and you're going to do regular deadlifts and your traps are going to grow, it is not going to happen. Trust me, I have over 600 pound. I could say that now. I have an over 600 pound deadlift, and I've gotten zero development out of that. When I use 50, 60 pounds in the cable machine, it's way more. Which just doesn't make any sense. Like when you think about it like that, like oh, you have a 600 pound deadlift, so your traps must be huge. It's like, well, not really.
Right. And a lot of people don't understand this too, that, you can be very strong in one specific lift, and it's not necessarily the result of one body part being extremely strong, if that makes sense. You have some bench pressers who are very strong because they're extremely tricep dominant, let's say. Like I'm one of them where I would say that my best bench press strength comes primarily from my tricep strength more so than anything else. So I can have a very strong bench press, and of course it's going to work my pecs. But if we're talking purely numbers, the argument is, if I have a 315, 365 bench, whatever it is, I'm going to have a big pecs. That strength might be a result of very strong triceps or very strong shoulders or very strong lats, let's say. And of course getting stronger within that movement is still going to stimulate my pecs, but reaching a certain point where you say, okay, if you have a 315 bench, you're going to have big pecs. There's plenty of guys with a 315 bench who really don't have big pecs. Yeah. Or at the same token, there's guys with huge pecs with a 315 bench who don't really have much triceps, and they're mostly pec dominant when they bench. So using numbers on a lift is kind of arbitrary. Yeah. The numbers on the lift are going to kind of be more unique to you. Like I said, so an example I'll give is if you're starting bodybuilding and you're starting with a 135 pound bench, you get that up to 225. Again, that's relative to you. You add another plate to that bench, those muscles are going to get bigger, but there is no milestone lift where it's like, okay, if I want huge traps, if I get to a 600 pound deadlift, I'm going to have huge traps. Maybe if you get to an 800 pound deadlift, you might have some huge traps, you personally. But then there's other guys who just, again, they'll deadlift 400 or 500 pounds, and genetically they have large traps. So the number itself, I don't think it's a universal thing. A lot of people like to put that out. This is the strength standard for this lift, and you're going to get big muscles as a result for that. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things too is, remember, when you're deadlifting or RDLing, your traps are just isometrically held. It's just literally holding you there. So there's no actual contraction of the fibers there. So any growth that you're going to get from there is just from that isometric hold, not so much a contraction. So you definitely need to add that in there. And going back kind of a little bit to what we said, we're finding those exercises that you feel the most. So I was laughing the other day. So we have an app for our clients in our gym. And so we're putting exercises in the app. So I had a video of some exercises. And, again, going to back development, pull-ups are always a staple. You got to do pull-ups, So for me, I don't really get anything out of pull-ups. Like I can do them, obviously. I can do a lot of pull-ups. But I never really get anything development-wise out of them. Like I've done them heavy. I've done them weighted before. I've done weighted stretches. All that crazy stuff that we did when we were younger. And I remember, like, at one point I was like, I'm not getting anything out of this. I feel more when I do pull-downs. So anyway, neither here nor there. So I'm recording an inverted row, like a level 1 inverted row where my legs are bent, completely bent, and I'm literally just picking myself up and squeezing. And I got such a pump in my lats from that. I'm like, maybe I need to program this into my training. Right? Like, I literally felt the whole lat. I never felt that on a pull-up once. So it just goes to and I always not poo-pooed that exercise. I'm like, oh, it's like it's just something that you need to do to grow, to get to do pull-ups.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to backtrack and think, if you feel something like that, like, that's a level 1 exercise. But if I feel it that much all the way through my lats, I'm like, maybe I should be doing that instead of pull-ups.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying, talking about using some very basic exercises like that. You know, there's a case for, as an advanced trainer, and this is something that really only applies to people that have kind of built their base of muscle, they've gotten stronger, they're in the advanced stages of training. There's a case for going back to very, very basic exercises that might even be considered a beginner exercise and applying it to your training, especially if, let's say, you're very dominant in one area and you might be lacking in another. This is very specialization, you know? So a lot of people that are first starting to build muscle and build mass, you're not going to necessarily tell them, okay, focus on an inverted row if they're strong enough to do, let's say, pull-ups. You know,
well, that's what I was just going to say. So now if I'm listening to this right now and I'm like, I'm an advanced person,
right?
So maybe I need to just go back to doing regular pull-ups with no weight, but maybe not. That's not the case.
That's not the case.
Because that's a level 0 exercise.
Right. It's a very individual thing. And it's a case-by-case basis. So, like, let's say, you know, I've actually applied this myself. This is very interesting. Again, this is a very advanced topic, but, you know, I've gone up to, I want to say, weighted pull-ups with somewhere around, I've done 100-pound weighted pull-ups before. I don't think I was training with reps high enough where I would kind of consider them, you know, muscle building reps. They might be just for strength, let's say, like 3 to 5. But if we're talking about training for hypertrophy, I was doing weighted pull-ups at my strongest were probably about like 90 pounds for, let's just say, like 8 to 10 reps, right? And at this point in my training, I don't necessarily have to be doing reps like that to be getting the same effect out of it. I actually have started incorporating lighter pull-ups for higher reps, let's say, and I'm getting more out of them now. Whereas that goes completely against the grain of if you're in a beginner or intermediate, the goal is just get stronger through those lifts. But then when you become advanced, you know, it's like the same thing. I used to look at bodybuilders when I first started training, and let's say like arms was always my focus when I first started training. I would look at like Jay Cutler. You know, when we first started bodybuilding, those guys, Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, like all we ever saw, right? And I remember watching a video of Jay Cutler doing his bicep routine, and he says in the beginning of the video, you know, we're going to start off with the standard barbell curl. We're going to get progressively heavy with the weight. We're probably going to go like as high as like 100, 110 pounds. And I'm looking at that as a beginner, and I'm like, I could do that, you know? And I'm like, and this is Jay Cutler, like, you know, his arms are like 3 times the size of mine, and he's saying like, yeah, we're going to go as heavy as 110 pounds, like as if that's relatively heavy. And in my mind, you know, I was still in the mindset of, okay, I got to progressively keep adding weight to the bar, which you do, especially in those beginner stages, intermediates. That's something you should never skip. But he's at a level where he can train with 110 pounds, and that's realistically heavy enough for him to get those same results. So there's always a case for, as you become more advanced, revisiting some of the beginner things you started doing, but getting more out of them as an advanced athlete. And I don't know if I'm explaining it the way that people understand it.
It makes sense because you want to always get more out of less.
Exactly, and especially the more advanced you are, the stronger you are. You don't always want to subject your body to such heavy loads, and I think that's something you've probably started doing a little bit more now. Something I've started doing a lot recently is I'll purposely try to get more out of less at this stage because I don't want to keep exposing myself to such heavy loads unless it's necessary. You know what I mean?
No, I agree 100%. Yeah. But yeah, going back to what we said about traps, if you're trying to develop your traps and you want your traps to grow, you need to do direct work. Direct work has to be in there. Like, and we said, you have to have your staples in there, right? Like, obviously some type of shrug.
Yeah.
And again, one of the things I neglected early on was like that middle and lower trap area. So make sure you work those in there. And a lot of people, and again, I fall victim to this too. A lot of people, especially in the beginning, told us like, oh, if you're doing your rows, you're good. You're hitting that area. And I'm under the impression that you need to be doing at least a little bit of direct work for every single body part so you can develop. If your goal is maximally developing your physique, you need to be doing a little bit of that.
And if you naturally have one body part that's very strong, you might not need to train it directly, especially just to maintain it. So somebody who naturally has large traps, they're going to maintain those traps, doing their deadlifts, doing their rows, doing their overhead press. In that case, they don't need to do additional trap work. But if somebody's trying to bring up any muscle group, there should be some direct work in there.
Agreed, 100%.